David Fowley, are you real or are you a replicant?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to check my director's cut.
Which, okay, help me out with something because we're talking about Blade Runner.
Oh,
We're talking,
okay.
well, oh,
On
wait a second.
on the wrong podcast.
Is this the Voight Kampf test of podcasting? Um, so we talked. We went to go see Blade Runner, 1982 Ridley Scott classic, at the Auditorium Theater in lovely Chicago, Illinois, on one of the windiest nights I ever recall being part of downtown.
Yep.
It was part of the Chicago Philharmonic. Did a It's a series they've been doing for a while now where they
hmm
actually show the movie on the big screen of this gorgeous theater, but they actually have live orchestral accompaniment playing all the music from the movie. I mean, all the music, including like the vocals. They have, someone singing the vocals from the show.
In this
Um,
case, yeah.
yeah, and it's pretty amazing. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk about Blade Runner, which is, I can't believe it's 42 years old this year. That's insane.
That's
But
crazy.
I want to ask you about the version that we saw
uh
because there's 5 cuts of this thing.
I
I
know.
don't know if they actually specified which one it was, so maybe
It,
you can tell me. It was one of the ones without narration, which I immediately saw as a red flag, but it's been a while since I've seen that version, so I don't know. What did you make of it, and which one did we see?
I think we saw. I don't know if we saw the final cut. Was the final cut was the one that was that the one that was released in theaters in the early '90s,
I don't
like
know.
'91? Okay, so it was either director's cut or final cut. But it it was the cut that cut the Kubrick Shining end scene.
The Kubrick Shining End. Okay,
Want
let's
me to
rewind the
back
tape a
that
bit
up?
here. Yes, because and this is okay. Every time I watch Blade Runner, it's
Mhm.
like I've never seen it before because
That,
I'm pretty sure
that's
every time
good.
I've watched a different version.
Yeah.
And my wife, who accompanied me to the event, and you were there with our
Mhm.
mutual friend Ralph, she had never seen the film before in any version, so this is her first time. And as she's walking out, like she's asking me questions about, it, like I have no idea. I half of it felt new, half of it felt different. I don't know what was going on. What's this Shining thing you're referring to?
So the studio, as far as I know, the studio, when this movie came out in '82, it did not do well.
Mm.
Famously, I think it came out like maybe a week after ET or something. And so, like, I think it came out the same day as John Carpenter's The Thing, which also didn't do too well because everybody was seeing ET. So both of those movies are now cult classics. But uh, so Ridley is also famously the type of director who always has a lot of cuts in his pocket, cuts of his films. Just so you know, so there's always going to be there's a Kingdom of Heaven cut. I'm sure there's a 1492 cut. I'm sure there's an American Gangster cut. He's got all sorts of directors cuts, and pretty soon we'll have a 3.5 hour Napoleon movie.
Yay.
So on that note, when he was working with, I think it was Warner Brothers, um, on Blade Runner, which is an adaptation of a Philip K. Dick story, "Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep?" Um, the studio was like, "You're going to have to put on a different kind of ending," because he had the ending that we saw at the Auditorium Theater, where they go into the elevator, Deckard's apartment elevator, they meaning him and Rachel, and then cut. Okay. So he was getting complaints from the studio saying, "Oh, the audience isn't gonna."
Wait,
So
that was the part they thought they'd be confused on?
so and also, of course, the original '82 theatrical release had the narration by Ford, but the ending. So I don't know how close of friends Ridley Scott and director Stanley Kubrick were, but he hit up Kubrick because he said, "Hey, I know you have a bunch of aerial stock footage or aerial footage from The Shining." And so remember at I don't know if you remember because I know every time you see Blade Runner, it's something new. But at the end, it's just like aerial shots, like they're in like you're basically have an understanding of they're in Deckard's spinner and they're leaving. They're going north, like she mentioned, and they're going out into the wilderness. And you see like all these like it's an aerial shot of like all these mountainous roads and a mountainscape and everything. And that was from The Shining. It's like when they were on their way to the lookout, or was it
The Overlook.
Overlook? I was going to say lookout. Yeah, the Overlook.
That would have been amazing if they had actually used that footage and they landed the Overlook and then it cuts out.
That'd be
Wow.
awesome. As these Scatman Crothers like, what's going on? Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, I'm glad that we didn't see that version because yeah, I think that that elevator scene was the perfect way to end it.
Yeah.
Now, so for those who have been living under a rock and don't know what the hell Blade Runner is, it takes place. This is what I love about classic movies and watching them contemporarily. In a packed theater, it was a laugh line when they show the title card, Los Angeles 2019.
Like, well, good thing we survived that.
Yeah, I mean, the city was on fire. There's pollution everywhere. It's a techno dystopia. I mean, it's far-flung science fiction, right? But no, it was so. It's this future where you've got the Tyrell Corporation, which manufactures these androids, and they use them for off-world, like essentially slave labor to colonize other planets and things. And at one point, there is sort of a revolt by these androids. The Nexus 6 series, specifically, they decide they don't want to be, just slave labor anymore. And there's a bunch of these like revolts and renegade androids running around. So they have these Blade Runners, which are a division of, I guess, the police of some kind, who are tasked with tracking down these androids and putting them down. And Rutger Hauer plays Roy Batty, who leads a contingent of himself and 5 other androids who make their way from space down to Earth. 2 of them die off screen, and then so it's 4 of them. And Harrison Ford is brought out of retirement as a Blade Runner. He plays Deckard, this kind of hard-boiled detective guy, and he's recruited by M. Emmett Walsh, who once again proves the M. Emmett Walsh Harry Dean Stanton rule, which is that any movie featuring those 2 actors has to be at least very, very good. I think that was
we need the old
Ebert.
magic.
Yeah, man, I just love that guy. He's great. But so yeah, he's got to track down these rogue androids, but he also meets the head of the Tyrell Corporation, Mr. Tyrell, who going back to The Shining is played by Joe Turkel, who was part of the Overlook crew. And here he's playing another sinister guy. He's got a new model named Rachel, who he keeps in his pyramid compound. I guess she's like the next level of these android characters.
Do you
and
like
Deckard, yeah, I guess he's getting into animals. Was that a thing? Like, I don't think they mentioned that they'd been branching out into animals, possibly because these androids had been outlawed, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously we see the owl a couple of times in the beginning when Deckard visits Tyrell and does the void comp test on Rachel, and then we see it later when Roy visits Tyrell in his bedroom. And there's always that kind of look at the like it almost looks like like a glare or a fake eye type thing. So I think they probably made these animals just because they can, and it looked like it was just like I like owls. Let's make a replicant owl.
Well, it's interesting because without that line of dialogue, you would think it was just Tyrell's pet owl. They don't have a moment where the owl lands and he takes off the back of its head to say, "Oh, look, see, it's actually an android owl."
Right.
It's just a real owl. But yeah, Rachel is the next, I guess, version of this, but she is in some ways a secret because again, these life forms are outlawed, except if you're rich and powerful and can keep these things secret in your compound.
Hmm.
I'm guessing.
Hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned some of what you said. Um, well, not a lot of it, but some of what you said happens off screen. To anybody who's watching that hasn't seen Blade Runner, a lot of that explanation of Roy Batty and his crew and how they crashed on the West Coast and the ocean. That's all explained um, in a conversation between Bryant and Deckard initially, um, and we never see that. In fact, we never really leave the kind of dirty, grimy Los Angeles. We don't see the coast. We don't see most of the movie. In fact, I think all of the movie takes place during the nighttime. And, so, and that could have been for a lot of reasons, obviously, more moody, the budget, or, whatever. You could do more, with back then matte paintings, miniatures, models.
Hmm.
And so I think it's, even though, like, I feel, because I've watched this movie so many times, and maybe it's because of I'm gonna say, straightforward storytelling, not simplistic, but just straightforward storytelling. Because there is that type of storytelling, we it's good storytelling too, because we have a picture in our mind of, oh, crashed into the ocean. There's these four, so it doesn't really need to be shown to us, because the way in which these characters are talking, it's like we could easily visualize
Yeah, there's that one line where Rutger Hauer's character is talking to Deckard. They finally meet at the end, and it's kind of a sad confrontation. It's a violent one, but the thing about these androids is they're given a 4-year lifespan,
lifespan. Yeah.
but they don't necessarily, from what I gather, have access to when their origin date is. So they're not exactly sure how much time they have left.
Right.
And at one point, Roy Batty is talking to Deckard and talking about how the things he's seen and done. Like, I can't remember the exact line, but it's like, have you ever seen a space freighter on fire at the edge of Orion or something
Hmm.
like that? And it's just there's something about the way the camera holds his face and that line delivery. It's almost hypnotic. Like, I could. That's one thing that I have carried over from each of my viewings of this is I see that scene when he's saying that sentence. I can picture it in my head, the theater of the mind, even though we never see it. I think modern movies would have flashed to some big special effects shot of like bodies burning in space or something, but no, it's that's all up to my imagination, which I
Well,
appreciate.
it's so great because, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think if this was made now, while I mean, the great part about that, the ending, which is, you expect a kind of climactic antagonist versus protagonist in a movie like this, but um, Batty, Roy Batty, Rutger Hauer winds up saving Harrison Ford's Deckard, um, and they both are exhausted, and one of them is expiring right there in the rain and at night. And of course, that's the classic, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion.
That's what it is. Yeah.
I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All these moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. And the camera stays on Howard the whole time. And I think you're right. Like you said, it's like, I think during that dialogue, if anybody else would have made this, you probably would have seen those things. Like, we would have seen the attack ships, and as he's explaining it. But no, we just stay on him, and he's holding. I don't know. I wonder. I have to watch it. Some of this behind the scenes stuff. So I wonder if it was Rutger Hauer's decision to like hold the dove, because he holds the dove and he's looking up while Deckard's hanging on to the side of the building. How Batty is on the building across the way, and he's holding this dove and in one hand, and he jumps over the side. He still has the dove in his hand, and he just he helps Deckard back up, throws him down, and he just sits down across from them, still holding the dove. Does that whole monologue, and as he expires, the dove lets go. I mean, it's almost like a great John Woo moment, but 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 that's just it. I mean, with the score, the Vangelis score during that time, it's just like, man, I mean, I remember being like 10, 11 years old the first time I saw this, and I was just like, whoa. Like, I don't know. I mean, at that point, I didn't expect such a um, kind of like an existential, um, provocative ending like that, where you actually think about mortality, instead of like a big battle.
Right, and the way that Howard dies, I mean, he's just kind of slumped over.
Yeah.
He expires, his
Hmm.
battery runs out, and again, that's not we don't see like a battery pack with like blinking lights getting weaker or something. We just see him, die in that moment, and it's beautiful. It's something that I hadn't really picked up on in the many times the handful of times I've watched it, obviously not as many as you, but each of these replicants, when they are being hunted and, they are desperate to cling on to life, even Daryl Hannah's Pris, who is sort of almost the seductress,
Pleasure
like
model.
pleasure model, right?
Yeah.
That's one of several problematic, as they say, things in this movie, and it
Yeah.
was a point of limitless discussion for my wife and I about
Mhm.
the scene between Deckard and Rachel, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
But no, with Pris, when she dies, I mean, she gets shot a couple of times, and her body almost has the same reaction as Ash in the movie Alien, when
Hmm.
his body starts flipping out because he is a robot who everyone thought was a regular person, and his body starts to short circuit and lose control, and people are having trouble like being in the same room with him. She kind of goes through the same thing. She's on the floor, almost like screaming and pounding her fists and legs like a baby
Yeah.
because she doesn't want to die. You get the sense that it's part short circuiting and part desperation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's probably nothing she's ever felt before, too.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so before that, there was he chased after, was it Zora?
Yeah. Joanna
Joanna
Cassidy's
Cassie's,
character.
yeah, who was um kind of like a, also I guess a pleasure model, who's a dancer with fake snakes and everything. Um it and I think each time, although Deckard is a has a good reputation as a Blade Runner, I I think each time he expires a skin job, you get the idea like why he retired. Um, the first time he goes into Bryant's office, thanks to Edward James Olmos, um, he says, and I'm glad we watched this with subtitles at the auditorium theater, because I always thought the line was, "I was quick when I left here, and I'm twice as quick now." But no, it was, "I was quit
Hmm.
when I left here, and I'm twice as quick now." To me, that doesn't make as much sense as quick, but okay. I
It
mean,
does
it
to
kind of
me.
does, but
It sounds like that artificial kind of like hard boiled dialogue. It's something you'd read in a Frank
yeah,
Miller comic.
right, right,
Nobody talks like that,
yeah,
but people wish they talked like that.
right.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was one of the things that I picked up. But I feel like, yeah, each time, there's a, like I said, there's a reason he's retired, because I think although he's great at his job, I think he's tired of like killing. He's tired of retiring androids, even if they're manufactured. They still, when they die, they still seem like people, you know? Um, yeah.
This that's an interesting read, and it makes a lot of sense. And my theory, I guess, which seems to change every time I watch this movie, and I know it's been a source of debate, and there was sort of a spanner thrown in the works when Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049 came out a few years ago. For decades, there had been a debate over, is Deckard
Yeah.
himself a replicant?
Yeah.
And where do you fall on that before I get
So
into my theory?
here's where I fell on that. I fall on, yes, he is a replicant.
He is, you're
Yeah.
saying.
Where
Okay.
I fell on it is, as a kid, and watching this, I'm like, there's no way Harrison Ford's a replicant. No, no, no. It's like I couldn't. I mean, literally, we watched him go from Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Rick Deckard, John Book. It's like no way. And of course, because that theatrical release in '82 had the dialogue, the voiceover dialogue, or not the dialogue, but yeah, the movie has dialogue, but the voiceover narration from Deckard, this kind of gumshoe Sam Spade narration, it humanized him a lot more, I think. And so when you take that out, which is what happened when the director's cut and the final cut was released, and you insert the unicorn dream that he has at the piano when he's drunk, um, yeah, and you also have the whole um, because the unicorn dream is in there at the end when we see Gaff's little miniature unicorn on the ground outside his apartment door. It's like, oh, there's a connection. That's why he kind of smirks and then leaves. So I feel like the final cut or the director's cut kind of communicates the potential of getting on board with the concept of Deckard being a replicant. But I don't think I'm on the fence whether he realizes it. Um, and maybe it took Rachel for him to realize it too. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is I think what started this journey was when he's talking to Tyrell about Rachel
Hmm.
and talking about what makes her so different, and it's this idea of it's not maybe it's pillows or something. He uses some kind of an analogy, but these kind of like fail safes that are implanted in her circuitry. So essentially, Deckard says you implant false memories.
He's like, you're talking about memories.
That's right. See, I should just say, what's the line, David? Because you've got this. Are you? I'm going to go back. Are you a replicant?
I don't know.
Um,
See. Ask my
but
wife.
whoa. Um, but so it's at that point he almost starts to question. I mean, he's looking at photographs differently. There's all these pictures of old photographs, people we assume are his family, and he starts to wonder, perhaps, are these even real? Who am I? Where do I come from? We don't know anything about his past, really, except that he used to be a Blade Runner and then he retired.
Hmm.
But as I'm watching this story unfold, I'm wondering, how old is he?
Yeah.
How far back does this history go? Was he the best Blade Runner for like 20 years and then he retired, but in actuality that was just programmed? He's only been around for 2 years, 1 year. The
True.
other cops on the force, or that he goes, MM Walsh's character, they recruit him back onto the job, implying they have a history, but we don't know how long they would have worked together.
Right.
He could have been a transfer into the department saying, "Oh, this guy's got a tremendous reputation,"
Right.
which could have been BS paperwork worked up to help him infiltrate this police unit, become a Blade Runner, and then he quit or was decommissioned, but made to think that he quit or whatever until he was brought back off the shelf to handle this problem.
Right.
Because we only see one other Blade Runner really in the film, and
Yeah.
that's the guy that from the
Holden.
opening interview gets shot, right?
Yeah. Holden. I love that
Yeah.
opening. Let me tell you about my mother.
Bam. Um, so yeah, he starts to come unhinged, and when he is, especially when he takes out, we'll call her Zora, Joanna Cassidy's character, he's really upset by that experience.
Hmm.
He almost has the same physical reaction as we see Brian James's character in the beginning when he's taking the Voight Comp test, which is essentially a series of random or seemingly random questions meant to infiltrate the programming of the blade of the replicants and evoke an emotional response.
Right.
It's almost like a hack to force them to give away the fact that they're not human. And we see him go through that one or two times, Deckard, through the course of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, for sure. And I think it increases, like I said, like each time he comes into contact with a replicant. Um, I did get a kick out of how he how Deckard made his way into Zora's dressing room. It's like because it's because I vividly remember, like, I feel like that was kind of like one of the first times you're seeing like Harrison Ford kind of like stretch and like play. He's still a character, but he's playing something else, as well. You know,
He's pretending to be a
yeah,
journalist or a fanboy
yeah,
or something like that.
yeah,
It
yeah.
reminded me of the bit in Star Wars
Or
when they're doing infiltrating the cell. How many times have I used the word infiltrate? But he's pretending to be an Imperial guard talking into the radio.
it reminded me of Last Crusade when him and what's his name? Oh, what's her name? Ah,
Ilsa?
Elsa. When they went to the castle, and he's like tapestries, you know. But it's like again, it was Indiana Jones playing somebody else. It was kind of cool to just to see some of his tactics, um, and you almost get the idea like with his expressions, like he doesn't know if this is really going to work, like if she's going to buy the fact that he's, you know, making trying to make sure that she works in a place that's not discriminating her, and she's like, "Are you for real?" And of course, yeah, he's not, or maybe he isn't, or really isn't.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
it's a pretzel and a mirror.
that's right. Um, and yeah, I mean, just and then that whole chase scene. I mean, just the congestion of the outdoor downtown, or I guess congested Los Angeles 2019. I mean, it was amazing, you know.
It is, and I know we talked about this briefly after the movie, and you're a fan of Blade Runner 2049, but
Mhm.
I mean, but oddly, I think we both agreed that this original Blade Runner, no matter which version we're looking at, does not need a sequel.
No, no,
And
it doesn't.
I stand by that. Like, I think that's part of my problem watching Blade Runner 2049. It was overlong, and I didn't feel like I got anything out of it that I hadn't gotten from the first movie. We still have a rather blank protagonist who is a Blade Runner or isn't. Is he a
Mhm.
replicant? Isn't he? What's the big mystery about like Rachel and Deckard from the first movie? I'm like, okay, so there's androids can reproduce now.
Or at least this one could.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
but
there's definitely things. I don't think it's a perfect film. Like I thought Jared Leto was miscast. I always say it would have been cool to switch out David Desmalchin's role in the movie with Jared Leto. That would have been cool. But um, I mean, I absolutely love the Dave Bautista scene. I thought that was, you know, visually and everything, the way it plays out was just so cool. But
it is, but again, it's still we get a version of that scene in Blade Runner with the whole like, pulling someone through the wall and all that stuff.
mhm.
Like when I'm watching Blade Runner 2049, I'm thinking I'm literally just watching a not that great version of Blade Runner with modern technology.
Yeah, I disagree on that. I feel like it adds a lot more. There's a lot more characters. There's a lot more world building
Okay,
here.
there are a lot more characters, I'll give you that much.
Yeah, yeah.
But what do we gain from the experience of this universe and what Philip K. Dick or Ridley Scott were trying to say with the original Blade Runner? I mean, people talk about Blade Runner 2049 now in the context of, yes, it was a Denis Villeneuve movie, and yes, it was a sequel to Blade Runner. When people talk about Blade Runner, they're still talking about Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Like 2049 is a thing that happened, but it's kind of like Mean Girls. 10 years from now, they're going to be like, yeah, remember Mean Girls? Yeah, Lindsay Lohan was awesome. No, I meant the musical. Wait, they meant a musical? Oh, shit, that's right. Yeah. Came out on VOD 6 weeks after it was in theaters.
I think 2049 will be remembered a little bit more fondly than Mean Girls musical, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, here we are 42 years later, we're still talking about Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, and it's been for a lot of valid reasons. Um, it yeah, didn't need a sequel. Heck, neither did Ghostbusters. I mean, I mean, there's neither a lot of a lot of movies from the 80s. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, I remember when there was talk about a Blade Runner sequel, and I'm like, no, no way. And even I think in the 80s, maybe mid to late 80s, maybe early 90s, they were starting to put out like Blade Runner novels. Not a whole lot, but at least maybe two or three. And I just didn't. I didn't want to touch it. But now they have, come over the since 2049, or maybe because of 2049, they've had comics and animated stuff, and um, I'm fine with that. But look, it's not gonna destroy my childhood. I still have Blade Runner. You know,
5 versions of it. Yeah.
I know, right? I have that. I think it came out around the time the final cut or something like that. Maybe
Did you
20
get the
something years.
suitcase?
The suitcase and everything with the little
I
spinner and
I had it and I think I sold it.
yeah.
The half price books, probably because I was like, oh, it'll come out on Blu-ray, and it did.
But it
There's a
didn't
nice
come out in
thing
that.
with it didn't come out in a suitcase. I
No,
should have kept the suitcase and
no,
just like sold the Blu-ray or the DVD.
yeah. Now the suitcase was in this movie, right? Because wasn't
Was
it?
that the thing that the Voight comp test was contained
Yes,
in or something?
yes,
Yes.
yes.
Hmm.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I think this was to me like again, it had such an impact on me because it was the first movie that like I would say that it was probably the first science fiction movie that I was fully immersed in. Because everything beyond Star Wars is not science fiction; it's space
No.
opera.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw some Star Trek and everything, but I started watching Star Trek by reruns of the original series. But this movie, I was just like, oh, this is what could, this is what our future could look like. And then I was like, man, Deckard's wardrobe's awesome. I still like, I would love to just like have tons of variations of Deckard's wardrobe and just wear that all the time. Like, love it.
It's interesting because this came out the same year as Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan,
Hmm.
and in both those movies, like, at one point, Kirk is wearing, I think a couple of the jackets with those wide kind of, like,
Hmm.
scalloped
Yeah,
collars,
yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
similar to what Deckard had
Yeah,
going
yeah,
on.
true.
Yeah,
They had like the raised collar, but then it kind of like an arch came down.
yeah.
Yeah, it was just so cool. Yeah,
It
I mean the costume design, everything. And I actually in 2018, I actually when I took a trip to Los Angeles, I did my own kind of Blade Runner pilgrimage where um, I went to different spots where the movie was filmed. I went to the Bradbury Building, where J.S. Sebastian works, and really I mean, obviously they did a lot more with it visually, but I went into the lobby and you could see those elevators. You know, it was just like, this is so cool. And then I went up to the Hollywood Hills and so Deckard's apartment, um, the interior apartment is what we really only see. That was, guess, the same house that was used for House on Haunted Hill, the original Vincent Price movie.
Whoa.
And I found all the addresses by like IMDb, so I'm like on my phone driving around, and so I went there, parked my car, and sure enough, there was another guy, and he's like, "Are you here because of Blade Runner?" I'm like, "Yeah, so we can. Can you take a picture of me in front of it? Yeah, I'll take a picture of you." And it was just so cool. But yeah, that scene where like mainly like the interior, like when you see his like kitchen and some other areas, that's the interior of this house. And also when he's like kind of wrapped up in a blanket with his whiskey and goes out into his balcony, that's also like kind of like the exterior of this house. And then everything else is matte paintings and all that stuff. But yeah, it's cool, man. You could do that, with movies made nowadays. It's all, this was made in the volume, this was made in green screen. you know?
And you can tell just as much as you could with the matte paintings and stuff, but
Yeah.
it's like 100 times less impressive. It's funny because, I mentioned to my wife that Blade Runner is one of my earliest movie memories in a theater,
Mm.
and I'm pretty sure my parents took me to see it when I was 5 years old,
Oh my gosh.
and she was, as with a lot of stories from my childhood that come out, she was more than mildly horrified, especially when the scene where Roy Batty confronts Tyrell and basically squeezes his head and gouges out his eyes with his
Mhm.
thumbs. I could feel my wife looking at me in the dark, and I know what she was thinking. She's like,
Your mom took you to this?
5 years old, huh? Yeah. Like
Or like it was probably your first boob shot on the screen, right? Like with Zora undressing and changing her clothes.
the strange thing is, I don't
Probably
remember.
not.
No, well, maybe. I that's there's a whole podcast series
Oh
of
my.
stories from my
Okay.
youth and movies. But no, the thing I remember most is Deckard like walking through, Los Angeles, like going to get sushi and
Hmm.
vague remnants of, vague recollections of him talking. I don't remember what the narration was, but I remember Harrison Ford's kind of monotone voice.
Hmm.
That was the impression that was left on my 5-year-old brain. And she's like, "Why would your parents take you to see that?" And I thought, well, they probably figured since I loved Star Wars, it's like, hey, Han Solo's in a new movie, and
Hmm.
they had no idea, but they didn't march me out. I remember that much.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean what I love is I didn't want to see a sequel to this movie, but I love the fan theories. And again, I don't need to see this in comics or in movies or TV shows, but just like the idea that there are connections between Ridley Scott's Blade Runner universe and Ridley Scott's Alien universe, like connections
Possibly.
between Tyrell Corporation, Wayland Yutani. There's all this talk of like colonizing other worlds using, androids who can pass as people like perfectly. It reminded me a lot of like Prometheus and Alien Covenant, with the whole idea of, David the android and this kind of desire to. And I know this came out, 3 or plus decades after Blade Runner, but the idea of the android trying to find its identity by finding its father and confronting it.
Hmm.
It Yeah, there's a lot of these great little connections there that make for, again, it's great to think about and to imagine, but I just know if someone were to actually make that, they'd screw it up.
Probably. Probably. Um, so with this, watching this this past weekend in concert at the
Mhm.
Auditorium Theater, did you pick up different things or new things or
Well, like I said, it was all new, because
because you're watching
I've
the orchestra and the movie, and I was curious, did you find yourself watching one or the other a little bit more?
it's strange because this was not my first experience with the
Yeah.
Auditorium Theater and the Philharmonic. I actually saw Ghostbusters there,
Right.
I think it was last year, um,
Yeah.
with, eh, was it Elmer Bernstein's
Hmm.
son or, conducting?
Oh, really? His son?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, it was like a big to do, and it was very cool. But watching Blade Runner, I had the same kind of experience where I found myself watching the movie, and then occasionally I'd think I'd be listening to the score, and it's very loud. I'm like, "Oh, that's loud because it's happening right in front of me." And I look down, I'm like, there's a full orchestra performing
All right.
this music right in front of me, every little bit too.
Yeah.
For example, and I don't remember. Do you remember the lady's name who was
Hmm.
singing? What
Cheryl
was her name?
Wilson.
Cheryl
She
Wilson.
plays electric viola and was a vocalist. Um, and my well, our friend Ralph, who I came with, he knows her and he's worked with her before, and he was just like, yeah, she's phenomenal, got a phenomenal voice. And when we see her, like most of the time she's sitting down playing her viola, but then in certain points, when we hear this like indecipherable like vocalist in the movie and everything going "Ah," um she's like like you just said, it like it sounds really loud, oh, because it's live and that woman's standing up and she's singing, and it literally, to me, it requires a great gift of mimicry, because it's not a language necessarily, and it's not something you just pick up. It's probably a combination of a lot of different things, but you would just assume that it's one of those things where she just had to study, that the movie, and just try and come up with her own thing, or not her own thing, but try and mimic it. And then she did a fantastic job.
Well, and the thing that struck me was the timing. I mean,
Hmm.
I I would have to. I wouldn't want to nitpick the experience like this, but I still feel like if you were to play the original Blade Runner and somehow match it up with the timing of the performance of the live orchestra, it would sync perfectly to
Yeah.
the point where even if somebody screwed something up and maybe they felt like really self-conscious, like, "Oh, I missed this beat," the audience would have no idea because it's a seamless experience. And
Yeah.
that's when she stood up and started singing, I immediately I couldn't tell you what was going on in that scene. She only sang for like a
A
minute or
couple of
two.
times, yeah.
Right. I was focused on her. It's like,
Yeah.
this is amazing. And when you're watching Blade Runner, that's incidental music.
Oh, totally.
Just right. So it's not like Deckard goes to the opera and is watching someone
Right,
perform.
right.
It's just music that's in the background.
Yeah.
So in the best possible way, it took me out of the movie. So
Yeah.
it's a great thing to experience. And I think especially if you get, I mean, I feel weird saying this. The screen, it's a huge theater,
It's a small
but
screen.
it's a small screen. It really is a live music venue. So
Mhm.
if you're gonna do it, I'd say get as close as you can because I was imagining we had good seats.
Yeah.
We're pressed. We had that advantage. But looking back, um,
If you were in the top balcony,
it'd be like watching it at home. But
on your
even
phone.
then, right. But in that case, I would imagine you're going more for the experience of
Yeah.
watching the orchestra,
Right, right,
right?
right. For sure. Especially if you have that kind of bird's eye view. Um, yeah, as far as the screen, there were definitely times where like the quality of the picture kind of like popped, crackled, and I'm like, why
Yeah.
is this? Um, One thing that was very interesting to me that was, I don't know if you noticed this, but it was during the scene where um, Roy Batty joins Pris at J.S. Sebastian's apartment home, and she and he are, buttering him up and complimenting him and really trying to win him over so he could bring them over to see Tyrell. Um, and I felt like there was this weird moment that I'm like, okay, I don't remember this music. And it was, I think, when Pris was kind of like maybe doing her backflips in the kind of toy area and stuff when they were talking to him. And I'm like, all right, I'll have to watch this movie again on my own because I don't remember that type of music. It was almost like it was the only kind of ripcord moment for me because it's like I feel like I know Blade Runner music really well, and to me, and maybe I just didn't know that part very well, but yeah,
Could have been something that was inserted between like different
yeah,
cuts and things. I don't know.
could be. So, but yeah, I mean, I think overall it was really cool because it's like you have three keyboardists in the front, and in front of those guys was the conductor who also has his own little monitor of the movie right in front of his stand there, along with sheet music. I have to say it was so cool to see sheet music and stuff. But and then behind the keyboardist, you have like electronic or electric viola, violin, saxophone. You have to have a saxophone for Memories of Green and the Blade Runner love theme. Yeah, mainly Blade Runner love theme. Um, and then there was some percussionists behind them, and then there was all the way to the stage right. There was a bass player for the love theme as well. Just really cool because like going in that this is going to be like a synth heavy performance, because it's Blade Runner and it's 80s and it's Vangelis, who even when he did Chariots of Fire, it was very synth heavy, you know. um, and Ridley Scott worked with Vangelis again when he did the kind of Christopher Columbus flap 1492. But yeah, it wasn't like one of the first things I noticed when I sat down is like, oh, this isn't like a full orchestra. It's kind of like a sinfonietta almost. It was it filled the stage, but it wasn't necessarily sparse, but you could tell that it was economical. Like the instruments that were needed were there, and that's it.
Yeah, the Ghostbusters experience was the stage was fuller.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I would imagine.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was kind of shocking to me. Not necessarily in a bad way, but I'm like, oh, did people call in sick? But no, it was it was just the people that they needed. I always thought it's the same number of people, but I guess it all depends on the piece. But yeah, I definitely recommend the experience. They've got a few more bangers coming up this year. They've got Batman '89 coming up in I think May. They're going to be showing Black Panther. They're going to be showing Bram Stoker. Sorry,
Francis Ford Coppola's Bram
Francis
Stoker's
Ford Coppola's Bram
Dracula,
Stoker's Dracula.
and then Love Actually.
Love
In
Actually,
December?
yes,
That would be interesting.
in December. Yeah. Um, before we
Yeah.
go though, by the way, I'll have information for all this stuff down below if people want to check out the Chicago Philharmonic like film series that they're doing. If you've never seen live music but you love movies, this is the perfect
Yeah.
combination opportunity to do it. But no, I want to go back to Rachel and Deckard.
Oh yes. Oh boy.
Help me out because I'm not that I have to defend Blade Runner because it's a beloved, landmark in the pop landscape, but I feel like it's got this centralized, what I'll refer to as a rapey problem.
It's
Uh,
cringy. Yeah.
what is going on there? Like, was this a 1982 sensibility? Was this a Philip K. Dick thing? Was this a Ridley Scott thinking, oh, we got to have a hard-boiled detective, so he's got a real problem with the dames, and he's not going to let any android stay in his way of his carnal desires?
I feel probably the latter. I don't know the novel as well as the movie, so I'm not sure like what all was in there. It is just really odd because at one point she's trying to leave, he follows her and kind of like throws her against the wall, and he's like, say you love me, or say you want me to kiss you, and just like forces himself on her in a way, and it's just like, and then he's like, and then at one point he's like, oh no, and he like, what? Make up your mind, dude. Um, and I would say probably the last time I watched this movie, I was also an adult. I wasn't that much, you know, I wasn't. I was probably in my 40s, and even then, I was like, this scene's kind of awkward and cringy, and gosh, I really never had a problem with this until now. No, but that's what being an adult and time does. But yeah, it's awkward.
And I'll bet that's, from what I understand, that scene has survived all of the cuts.
I'm sure because I mean it would be hard to cut that because it's pretty lengthy and
It wouldn't though, because I mean, all you'd have to do is, I don't know, when he stops her at the door, or maybe when he says kiss me, or you could cut around it or something and
yeah,
just have them waking up, you can give the impression, you cut to black and then give the impression they're waking up next to each other
yeah.
and have it be a fully consensual, you know,
I,
tender moment that because the end where he goes back to the apartment and they go off to escape because
uh,
she is going to be hunted by people like
right,
him,
yeah,
and they're going on the lam together and they apparently love each other. That works so much better if she wasn't sexually assaulted.
right, right. Yeah, I feel like I don't know why. In a way, I because of that, I don't know why she leaves with him. I think it's probably because he's her only chance to move on and survive,
Which
and
makes it that doesn't make it better though.
no, it doesn't make it better. No, I'm not saying it makes it better. I'm trying to justify why she likes him after he throws her around. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. So
And
so yeah, I think there needs to be, like, everybody out there, just make your sixth cut of the movie where you just like
right, right.
skip past that on the chapter listings.
Yeah,
Um,
more. Just put in more Brian Jones or James Hong making eyeballs.
yeah, that was an interesting scene. He's in this like frozen warehouse harvesting eyeballs, wearing a giant fur jacket with hoses hooked up to it. And I love that they don't explain what's going
No,
on. They show what's going on.
yeah,
Those hoses are keeping him
warm.
warm in this sub-zero environment. And then these guys show up and gradually just unplug this stuff as they're getting information out of him.
Yeah, so
Like,
good.
most of these deaths, and I think that's possibly why they made such a big point of Joe Turkel's death at the hands of Rutger Hauer, literally, is because the other deaths, aside from the opening interview, they mostly happen off screen,
Right,
right?
right.
Um,
Even Sebastian, he
yeah,
he died off screen. And Yeah, because I remember even when I was watching this, I'm like, wait, did they ever show Sebastian? No, okay.
Yeah, I think the last you see of it is, he witnesses
Yeah,
Tyrell's death,
yeah.
and then he makes for it, and then you hear Roy Batty, I think he says, like,
Come,
come
come.
back," or something like that. Yeah, like, "Oh,
Like he's a
shit."
dog. Come,
Right.
come. We have to say a little bit more about Howard's performance because he brings so much to that role. I mean, he is probably one of the most like that is probably the most charismatic, crazy antagonist of the '80s um, sci-fi movies. It just feels like he does so much, and I don't know what was in the script or what was on the paper. I think he brings so much more to what's on the what the role requires.
And it might be this viewing because it really puts it into focus. I don't think he is the antagonist only insofar as
Well,
he's the
yeah,
person that the
yeah,
hero of the film, the cop, is trying to hunt down.
right, right,
But I see him as sort of like the most sympathetic
yeah,
character in the movie because he didn't ask to be born as this thing. When he realizes he breaks the bonds of his own slavery to go find the person who created him and essentially beg him, like, look, give me and my, your other children a chance to live.
hmm,
And when scientist dad refuses him, he does it in a cold way, but it's very matter of fact. It's not
yeah,
like he's lording it over him. He's like,
yeah,
look, it's just not going to work because we've tried it before and there's all these mutations and viruses and horrible things. And so my wife asked me, like, why did she have to kill him? I was like, well, it's because his job, or one of the facets of the Tyrell Corporation, was making these replicants. And
right,
so all he's doing is perpetuating and creating these 4-year span life forms that are possibly not self-aware. And if they do become self-aware, there's nothing they can do about it. So they're just product, but they on some level may have souls. It's
right,
very poetic and tragic. And when he died, I was genuinely sad this time to see him kind of
right.
hunched over in the rain.
And he's wacky, but he's also he's brilliant. They have that discussion of why they can't have it be him and Tyrell, why they can't extend this lifespan. They talk about organic life. They talk about was it EMS3 recombination, ethyl methane sulfonate, acolyte. What the both of them are almost like matching each other. You could do this. Well, if you do that, that won't work, and it only lasts this long, and then you'll still die. And it's like to me, it's like because the subtitles were on the screen, I was like, wow, I don't remember picking up all that.
Well, and I think there was an explanation earlier on in the film about the 4-year lifespan, how
Right.
they had tried giving them regular lives, but they didn't program them with emotion. But there's something about the nature of being humanoids or around people that they would eventually, like over the course of their lives, develop the full range of emotions, but it also kind of drove them crazy. I mean, it's fascinating. But Roy Batty's character, I feel like half of his reputation as a cinematic villain or nemesis is because of that last name, Batty.
Yeah.
He's crazy.
Yeah.
He's played by Rutger Hauer.
Right.
I think if it had just been like Roy Smith, people would have looked at him differently. I'm wondering if that was a deliberate decision to make him seem at first as this thing that needs to be stopped, but it really is
Yeah.
Tyrell and the things he represents that need to be stopped.
And I think too, it's like after if you knew like some of the other movies that Howard was in that I guess I don't know American moviegoers were aware of. After this, it was like Lady Hawk, where he plays a good guy. Um, uh, the Hitcher, which is like
Oh,
where he plays another psycho. But yeah, I just he's just so iconic. Um,
for a decade after I watched The Hitcher, again, at way too young an age, I ate I ate french fries with a
oh,
unhealthy amount of suspicion, like,
and
check
ketchup.
every one. Yeah, there wasn't any of this like, "Oh, just grab a bunch of fries and put 'em in my mouth." No, every one I looked at before I put it in my mouth. It was horrible. Oh.
Mm-mm-mm.
But yeah, so, any final words on Blade Runner? I mean, given that we are movie podcasters, I find it hard to believe this is the last time we'll talk about Blade Runner, but for right now, this
Mhm.
chapter, close it out for us, David.
Wow.
No pressure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely, as we've noted, it's definitely whether you're watching it in concert with an orchestra or you're watching it for the upteenth time. I think you can always get something out of it. I mean, it's just it's visually stunning. The screenplay is great, and it again, it's not a it's not a very complex story, but it is surprisingly deep. And it's also I recommend this book called Future Noir. I should have pulled it off the shelf, but this book is a thick book called Future Noir, and it's all about the making of Blade Runner and how it came to be and all the craziness that came with it and everything, and yeah, all the cuts and whatnot. It and it is kind of crazy that Ford came back for this sequel because you know back then, I mean, because the movie didn't do so well, like I said, he famously didn't like the narration that he did, voiceover narration, and he never really, you know, talked proudly of that movie until later, um, when it kind of became a cult classic. But yeah,
It's kind of like what we're seeing right now with Dakota Johnson and Madam Web.
no,
I had to see if you
I
take
would
the bait.
I would love to see an '80s Sean Young as Madam Web. That would be great. Going
I
bug
how
nuts.
how do we feel about Sean Young? I never
She's
really got her as a thing.
I What I remember is like this movie, No Way Out, with Kevin Costner, Gene Hackman, um, and then her audition for Catwoman for Batman Returns. I mean, I just know that she became like so like out, kind of like crazy loony outspoken in the talk show scene, you know, and all that. But I also have read that people who've worked with her thought she's great to work with, and some don't. So I don't know. I I liked her in this role. Um, she kind of just had that classic from the moment we see her, that classic film noir look, with the hair and the costumes and everything. And then, interestingly enough, I think when she feels more comfortable with Deckard, that's when she lets the hair out, and there's this big curly mane of hair. That found that interesting. Like, to me, that kind of indicated that she is not only feels safe and comfortable around him, she's kind of coming into her own as a person too.
It's the one case where I would say, let's swap her out for Ana de Armas in Blade Runner 2049.
Mhm.
Let AI make that happen.
Okay,
That'll be the 7th cut.
there you go.
That does not include the uncomfortable sexual overtones. All right. Well, David Fowley of Keeping It Real, thanks for talking Blade Runner. I guess it's the director's cut. Could have been any of the other cuts. I don't know. But yeah, this was fun. It was great, seeing you in person, watching
Yeah,
some classic theater, some classic Chicago Philharmonic, and I hope to be able to do that again, maybe even in a couple months with. Can you believe Batman is 35 years old this year?
that's just crazy. And I was thinking about that being the next one, and I'm like, all right, they would definitely have to fill the stage with more musicians for that score. But
I'm just picturing that opening scene. I
oh
mean,
yeah,
just regardless of the orchestra, it's one of the great openings
hmm
in cinema history,
hmm
and it's just a camera running through a model of a bat logo with that Elfman score.
and interesting too, though. I mean, how would they do some of the Prince stuff? Like would they? I mean, I know it's just score and everything, but like like when some of that Prince music is playing, like when uh, Jack Napier kind of breaks into the art gallery, or even during the parade. I mean, that's you hear bat dance and all that stuff. It's like,
I'm more curious, I think, about Love Actually, because
I
that's got
know,
a great score, but it's also riddled with pop tunes. So do
right?
they
So
get people to replicate those, or do they just like play it from the movie and
yeah,
the rest of it is, instrumental? I don't know. But
yeah.
we're gonna find out this year. We're gonna get to the bottom of this mystery.
That's right.
We're gonna be cinematic Blade Runners, if you will.
That's right.
But anyway, I'm gonna let you go, sir. Everybody, thank you for watching. Check out David's stuff at Keeping It Real. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks. Wait, I was gonna do the last bit with Harrison Ford's kind of like blank narration as a replicant.
Too bad she won't live. But then again, none of us do.
That's it.